please keep yourselves muted. At the end of the presentations, we'll have time for questions. We may pause in the middle for some questions. At that point, you can either raise your hand or write the word question in the chat and we'll call on you. Or if you prefer, you can just type your question in the chat. So our speakers today are Deepika Bhatia, who's the Associate Vice President for Research Compliance and Regulatory Affairs. And she also serves as Emory's Chief Research Security Officer and currently the Senior Deputy Research Integrity Officer. In her role, she oversees Emory's Research Compliance Program and leads the offices of Research Integrity, Research Security, Export Controls, IACUC, and Conflict of Interest and Commitment. Our second speaker today is Maria Davila. She is the Director of the Office of Research Integrity and Compliance, which is part of the Office of Research Compliance and Regulatory Affairs. She also serves as the Deputy Research Integrity Officer, and her team works closely with the Research Integrity Officer to review research misconduct allegations from the initial assessment all the way through the investigation if that is needed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria and Deepika. And thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Kathy. We appreciate the opportunity and glad to be a part of everyone's day here today. So as part of our session, we wanted to go over some of the important highlights of preventing research misconduct, and then also to give you some relevance on why research misconduct is or could be an issue for research institutions like Emory, and then also go over some processes as well as definitions that NIH Office of Research Integrity has. And then with that, we'll do a little bit of how do you spot or how do you recognize research misconduct? How do you report it? And then how is research misconduct managed? And we wanted to give you a little bit of transparency into what happens at Emory when we receive a research misconduct or an allegation that could potentially be research misconduct. We also have seen lots of investigation outcomes nationally, and so we wanted to share some of those as to what happens when we have an investigation of research misconduct that is substantiated. And we'll go over some tips to helping you recognize as well as some of the prevention strategies that we have in place as part of Emory's research misconduct program. And as with any research misconduct program, one of the strongest backbones of a robust program is having responsible conduct of research training. So NIH recently updated the training requirements as well as added some curriculum items, and that went into effect September 25th, so not too long ago. And so with that, we have a new module that's in place. And so we have, hopefully we'll have some time today so we can demo and walk you through the module as well. Next slide, please. So as part of, in its simplest form, research misconduct, according to the federal regulations, it's defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in either proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or as well as in reporting of research results. This does not include any honest errors or if there's any difference of opinion. And NIH further defines what fabrication is, what falsification is, and what when is it that plagiarism happens. Some of the other issues which are associated with misconduct, research misconduct many times, but they are not necessarily research misconduct. And we'll go over those a little bit in detail as well. So one is authorship issues, and those are managed through a different policy at Emory outside of the research misconduct policy. And then there's also self-plagiarism, which again is an issue at on the academic research side, but is not categorized as research misconduct. Next slide, please. So what happens when we receive a case at Emory or an allegation at Emory? Our overarching process is very much in alignment with what NIH Office of Research Integrity requires, and it's very prescriptive. They do require us to have a sequestration process, meaning that we're doing lots of due diligence in gathering information, gathering raw data, doing some analysis to determine whether we do need to have what they define as an inquiry committee, which is the first stage of research misconduct allegation management. And then there's also lots of defined dates and timelines around when these cases or how, and as well as how these cases should be handled. So for example, for the inquiry that needs to be completed within 60 days, and then we have to provide ORI with a report within 30 days. And then if it is determined at the inquiry stage that we need to have what's called as the investigation, that's the next step, then within 30 days, we need to start the investigation. And then we also have to finish the investigation in about 120 days. So as y'all can tell, it's very prescriptive in how long these cases should proceed. We do many times end up requiring extensions just so that we can have a good, thorough process of investigating. And then once we have completed, one of the items that I do want to address and reiterate today is once we have an investigation that has been completed and say we have a substantiation of research misconduct finding, then there's another report that goes out to the Office of Research Integrity at NIH. And there is quite a bit of discussion at their end, sometimes with our institution as well, to make sure that there is a good alignment of corrective actions, making sure that we have any restoration of records that is needed, research records that's needed, that happens. And one important aspect of what NIH requires, as well as what is part of our process, is having a restoration of reputation. So sometimes it can just be we write a letter and then that's pretty much it. Many times it also requires additional actions, such as making sure that we are informing the journals to let them know that the matter has been handled, we didn't have any issues, and so the respondent's reputation has been retained and not marred. And then most of the times we want to make sure that there is a correction of perception of misconduct to anyone that was made aware of the allegations. And so in some instances, rare instances, but it does happen that we have to have conversations with departments, with divisions, just to make sure that there is the confidentiality piece of the investigation is maintained. People are not talking about the case. A person's reputation is unharmed, essentially. So that's just a crux of how a case of research misconduct allegation is handled. We also have our policy, which is 7.8. So the institutional policy is 7.8 for management of research misconduct cases. I must tell you all, for any of y'all who have actually looked at the policy and maybe have read it, it is a 23-page long document. And so as part of our continuous improvement efforts to make sure that we are having our policies aligned in such a way that they provide all of the information, but they're not very procedurally burdensome to read and understand. And so there is an update to the policy that is currently happening, mainly to remove procedural information, which is more for administrative persons on the research side, as well as on the school side. And so, for example, at the School of Medicine level, we do have an administrative official, and Josh Barwick is our partner to make sure that at the School of Medicine level, we do have cases that are adjudicated with due process, and we have a good, thorough, robust process of managing research misconduct cases. And so that policy, as I was mentioning, 7.8 is getting revamped. And in its final state, if you don't count the definitions, which are about a page and a half, it's about 9 or 10 pages long. So we have made quite a bit of effort to make sure that we have procedural guidance removed from there, and the policy is more direct in making sure that there is an understanding of what happens at Emory, what are the requirements from a regulatory standpoint, and how things can be reported and they're managed at the school level and in collaboration with the Office of Research Administration. Next slide, please. So here are some of the outcomes of research misconduct investigations. Sometimes we do have, there are various factors that can depend on how ORI defines what the next steps or what corrective actions might be. Some of these factors, it could be the scope of the misconduct, it could be the length of time that the misconduct has occurred and gone undetected. It could also be the possible impact on public health or clinical treatment. If there's been any retaliation against the complainant or other mishandling of the allegation, and then also the extent of media coverage that can play a role in the impact that a particular case may have on an individual researcher and especially on their institution. And so many times the NIH ORI will make a finding of research misconduct, especially when there is a significant departure from accepted practices of the relevant research community, and if the misconduct has been committed intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. And then also if the allegation has been proven by a preponderance of evidence. Now, the committing intentionally and knowingly, that's definitely something that misconduct is based off of, or the substantiation of misconduct is based off of. The portion where it's recklessly defined, and we get questions many times, and we ask these questions many times from the NIH offices as well around the reckless piece. And so there has been very recently in the last couple of months, there has been a new proposed rulemaking, the NPRM, that has been released after 2005 to reassess some of the practices that ORI has, some of the policies that they have, which includes in their comment period that is currently underway, how to define recklessness. So I'm sure we'll have more information about that. But essentially what, based on some of the cases that we have looked at, it's essentially having an indifference to truth. That's how they have typically defined it. And so once we have an outcome of a research misconduct investigation, some of the common consequences that we see are requiring assurances, making sure that we have, sometimes there's even if an investigator is allowed to restart their research, there is a level of monitoring that can happen. Many times, depending on how egregious the research misconduct case was, there can be debarment from conducting any further research. And then sometimes there's also a period of time for which there is no research that is allowed. Sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. And then there is a lot of effort that is needed, both at the researcher end as well as at the institutional end, to make sure that research activities can start again without having similar issues that take place or similar misconduct allegations that can come up again. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Maria.
Thank you, Deepika. So the next slides are going to be focused on giving you some tools and, some information to prevent research misconduct in your research, in your lab, or your clinical research. So we want to start with this information that we got from ORI and their partners about red flags that you should be looking for. So the first red flag revolves about time. So if you're working with a collaborator or somebody that is under you, somebody that you supervise, and you are noticing a pattern when data that is needed for the research is only generated when there is a deadline, then it is something that you need to look into and ensure that, there are no issues there. A lot of the cases that we reviewed and more importantly, cases from the past that ORI has reviewed. So a lot of this advice comes from that experience, not necessarily our own experience here at Emory, but it is, there have been found that when an investigator has the situation, sometimes there's something bad happening in the back. Another thing in the same vein is research procedures that are completed faster than is expected. So, you know, a research procedure may take some time and somebody magically have done something really quickly, then that's another red flag to look for. On the bucket of results, another thing that, you know, we need to keep an eye on is if data that it seems to be too good to be true. And on the same line is also data that cannot be replicated. So if you work with a collaborator again, and you work with somebody you supervise, this is very important because it is, you know, having data that can be reproducible is very important. And if you cannot find ways that you not only replicate the data, but also to people not be able to explain how the data was produced is another red flag. So on that, I want to stop for a second and discuss the difference between collaborating with somebody and also supervising somebody, because this becomes critical. It's potentially easier to see in somebody that you supervise this type of thing and identify it quickly, but somebody that you collaborate is more problematic. And that's why transparency is also important. And the next bucket of discussion, right? That you can be, you can have available the raw data, because if it doesn't exist or somebody says that cannot be accessed at this time is another thing that you can be looking for. Also, there should be always a collaboration and a transparency in the fact that materials and protocols should be always visible for everybody. So the university provides to all of us the use of OneDrive and other storage places where we can save information and make it sure that can be shared with everybody in the team. So that's something that should not be an issue. And finally, research that is completed when no one is around is another red flag. Again, that happens a lot when we know investigators sometimes have to put a lot of hours and work really hard, sometimes on weekends. But if all the research happens when nobody's around, that's another red flag to be looking for. So on this part of authorship and plagiarism, we want to make a differentiation here because it's something that we always get questions about. And we see, you know, it's very clear that it's easy confused. So we want to just provide some clarity here. So in general, when we talk about authorship, we talk about members of a same team that are having a dispute or a disagreement about who should be author, depending on the value of their effort when they're working on a publication or a grant. So that means that in order to be an authorship issue, you have to be working with somebody in the same project, right? So for plagiarism, that will involve somebody that has not been working with you. So you are, somebody's taking your work and making them their own, and you have never collaborated with them. So that's what we put in the bucket of plagiarism that becomes part of the work that we do. As Deepika alluded before, when we have an issue with authorship, we normally collaborate with the school to provide information we have, try to make it as clear as possible what we have found. But normally the investigation or the assessment, better said, of that situation is reviewed by the school. And we have good partners in every school to work on these things. But that's basically the process for that. So here's an example, you know, and that's a very common one. If we get a student that complains about a PI that who has left them out of a publication, then we consider that issue not a plagiarism situation, but an authorship matter. So another thing we want to make you aware of is the issue of self-plagiarism. Definitely not research misconduct. That's something that we don't take or review. But you know, taking your own work and copying it and pasting it with one publication with another is something that might be acceptable in some things, but not in general. So in other situations, so we make sure that if you are, you know, copying your own work, that you use the same precautions that you use when you are basically paraphrasing or taking somebody else's idea to, you know, to promote your own when you do a publication. So that's something that in general we should be very careful on. And also try to also, you know, credit yourself and, you know, cite. So in general, we just recommend that because in the academic context, that type of practice is considered to be double dipping. So just another thing to keep an eye on this area, because we don't want you to be in a situation where somebody is going to complain to us about something that might be just a misunderstanding or something that, you know, we should just put more attention to, but then we have to investigate it as if it was a bigger issue that it was really. originally. So we want to also provide some tips to prevent research misconduct. And the first one we have is about graphics. So if you have a graphic, that might be very obvious for everybody, but sometimes the publisher may have specific requirements. And if you are following those requirements, you're probably going to be out of any issue with confusion of what was presented or anything like that. So we want to make sure that you're very familiar with the publisher requirements on the graphics and how they should be presented. You will be surprised how many times we have to review things where just by simply looking at the information that the publisher required would have been prevented. Another thing is image enhancements. So in general, we understand that sometimes we need to, or you may need to take a graphic and try to maybe emphasize an area that you want to draw people to. But if you're changing image so much that the meaning of the information changes, that could be, or definitely will be a problem. So, and any type of changes to an image, and we're talking by simply probably copying and pasting, or maybe just cropping an image, sometimes that we understand is adequate because you have certain space, right, in a publication to present your image. So we understand that sometimes happen. But we need to document, or you need to document with a publisher exactly what changes have happened, what type of enhancement, so everybody has clear exactly what you have done. And they can tell you if that's acceptable or not at the time of publication. So sometimes, and that's something, again, that could happen because you have more than one image you want to show, but you have limited space in the publication, and you're putting two images together. Make sure that you put a line between them, or any other divide that very clearly indicates that one image is not the same as the other. Again, something that is very innocent, but what could create a lot of issues for you, because that's not aligning with the practices that you're supposed to be doing when you publish something. Another thing that we want to alert you about, which happens a lot, is that you might be collaborating with somebody from another discipline, which is great. And that's something that NIH and a lot of sponsors really encourage, and also we encourage for sure. But make sure that, again, there's a transparency there when you're sharing information to people. Because if your name is going to be in a publication and you're going to be maybe the corresponding author of the publication, make sure that you have a basic understanding of what has happened on the other side, where is information, where you can find it, because you will be responsible if something would happen to answer those questions, right? And sometimes just saying, I didn't know what the other person was doing might not be enough. And honestly, we understand that you cannot be an expert in every person's discipline when you're presenting a publication like this, because it is unreal, right? Everybody has their own specialty, their own expertise, and we understand completely that. But at least that you have to do your due diligence to make sure that you have documented and that you have found, or you know where the information is in the case that you need to find it. And at the end, and this might be, again, another thing that is a no-brainer, but you will be surprised on how many people may confuse that, you know, an eager investigation. I mean, an eager investigator is not necessarily one that doesn't want to conduct research with integrity, because we're all, of course, in a very important work that we want to move forward, and we're working really hard. But just reinforce the idea that for you, research integrity is the most important thing when you're doing research. So finding the answer and, you know, having good results is definitely important, but for you, research integrity is the most important thing. So, or I also provide some tips to avoid plagiarism. And, you know, and this again might be very obvious for a lot of you, but we wanted to give you this information to pass to others and also to, you know, refresh some information. So first of all, when you're paraphrasing and summarizing, always make sure that first, of course, you identify the source of the information. That's very important to do, but also that you reproduce the exact meaning of the author's ideas with your own words and sentences structure. So it is not enough to change some words here and there to say the same thing. The idea is that you're using the information that you get from somebody and making your own, in the sense that you are basically interpreting, but also, of course, keeping the meaning of the author, but you're using your own words. So authors who submit a manuscript for publication, that contains previously disseminated data, reviews, conclusions, most clearly indicate the nature of the previous dissemination. So that's important because, you know, you want to give credit to when the credit is due, but also make sure that people can find that information and understand where that information comes from. So in general, if you have any doubts about something that you're using for a publication, it's always good to provide a citation. And this is especially important when you're working with people that maybe are international that may understand citation the way that we do it here in the United States. And I would just say that because I was lucky enough to be part of a group that was training some students here at Emory with the Department of English department. And they taught me about, for example, that sometimes if you have a professor that works with you and you want to maybe make them feel like, you know, the work is important for you and you use their work for your publication, these students said to me, well, we normally don't cite them because if we don't put the citation, it's basically to say to my professor, your work is so amazing and so important that I didn't need to cite it. And the professor understands that. But here in America, that doesn't fly at all, right? So some people may have a confusion, a very innocent confusion, but that's why it's important to just provide that information to them so they understand what are the rules here and that everybody's clear that we're not trying to do anything wrong. It's just, you know, the way that things are here. So to finish this presentation, we want to talk about our, you know, the culture of integrity. And that comes from, again, RI has this nice graphic that talks about ways that supervisors can promote research integrity. So the first thing is always to be available and approachable. So we understand that everybody's very busy, everybody has a lot of things going on, but make sure that you put apart some time to talk to the people that you supervise, your clinical research coordinators, your lab people, everybody. So you have a time to offer to them and, you know, basically clarify any doubts and just provide these assurances of the importance of the work that they're doing, the integrity of the work. And also, you know, to say that I'm here and for me, the work is important. So I can check on raw data, how the research is going and make sure that you identify, again, those red flags. Number two, again, is review raw data. Again, you are the responsible party if you're the supervisor of somebody. So make sure that the raw data access is easily accessible and you can see it. I mean, we have had cases where somebody, because they're busy, review raw data at the end of the process and then they found a lot of surprises. So we don't want that to happen to anybody. So if you're looking at this data with frequency, you will be able to find and make sure that everything works well. Another thing that, you know, ORI suggests is communicate your expectations. Just by talking and just clarify things initially and maybe reiterating those things later, you can prevent misunderstandings and making sure that everybody understands what are the rules of the lab or what are the rules of the research and the way that you conduct research here. Another thing is to provide training and guidance. Under NIH, if you have an NIH grant, you are required to provide training to the people you supervise, and those trainings sometimes are one-on-one. It could be in person. You know, we of course have the School of Medicine offers a training in person, but still, it is important that you also provide training on the protocol, on the things that are happening in your lab, to basically avoiding making assumptions that anybody knows what they're supposed to do or they have the knowledge of what things are supposed to, how things are supposed to happen. So that's another thing that is very important. And finally, get to know us, your research integrity officers. We're here to help you. We, you know, we're very friendly, believe it or not. We want to help. We want to collaborate with you. We want to train you, offer anything that we can do to help you, you know, stay out of trouble. And especially, you know, I reiterate the burden sometimes that is this training for people. So we are there to help you in any way you need. And with that, we want to also put here some information or resources for you. And that's the end of this presentation.
Thanks, Maria. So as Maria mentioned, it looks like there's a lot that happens behind the scenes, and it is true. There is a lot that happens. A lot of it is driven by NIH guidance. Sometimes we get whether nationally or at Emory, we get cases that they have a little bit of a what we like to call it as a twist to them, and so we do for those that we either haven't seen here or they are looking a little different, we do have a good relationship with the NIH ORI team to make sure that they can provide us the guidance that we need. And so we reach out early and we reach out often. And so if y'all have any questions for us, anything that y'all are not sure of whether it needs further attention or it's not looking like it perhaps should, please feel free to reach out. One of our main aims is to make sure that we have that we talk about these things rather than having a taboo on these topics, so that we can openly discuss strategies, anything that we can offer as support and assistance, we're happy to. And just reiterating the wonderful infographic that I had put out and Maria had walked us through. I think between whether it's in the lab, whether it's with your research personnel, I think having those transparency and open lines of communication so that there is open discussion. There are issues, if there are issues, they're handled in a constructive manner. It allows us to proactively address problems. And then I think setting up roles and responsibilities as well as expectations, whether it's for review of raw data, whether it's having peer reviews as part of a standard operating procedure in your research, within your research teams. That helps both from catching of honest errors as well as any intentional manipulations that may have happened before it's released externally to a publication agency, to another collaborator. And then some of these expectations are also creating a standard for how experiments are conducted, the reproducibility aspect of it, how data is supposed to be managed, and discussing timelines of projects so people don't feel that they were pressured into doing something or they didn't have the time, and so they sought to unethical means, if you will. And also setting up one of the things that we have addressed a few times and then also has come up in several boot camps that we have attended is evaluating trainees, setting up a platform so it's known and it's well discussed, well addressed as to how trainees are evaluated. And then, of course, as your Rio team, we are always here. We are led by Dr. Robert Nobles, who's the VPRA, and Maria and myself. We're always here to support you. I think Josh is on the call as well. He's our liaison and partner within the School of Medicine, and so we're all here to support and address any questions, anything that y'all might have for us, so we can make sure that with all of the great research that we do, we have minimal issues and allegations that we have to address.
Are you ready for some questions?
Yes, we are.
I want to start with one more. We're giving people a chance to put their questions in the chat or raise their hand, which is something that's come up recently in my field, where an investigator had some papers retracted that were published more than 10 years ago. And the reason given by the journal was they couldn't validate the results. And part of that was he had moved from, not to Emory, but to another Atlanta institution from a Midwest institution a number of years ago, and destroyed the data from those studies that were done 10 years ago. So the question is, how long are we required to maintain records of data once something's published? Because we've gotten really confusing information about that.
Yeah, so we do have a 6-year statutory limitation. However, what happens with that limitation is, say there was a publication that happened, and it happened outside of that 6-year time frame. So the 10 years, we'll go with the 10 years that you mentioned. But that publication was since then cited in other research articles, which are still within that 6-year time frame. So then that kind of resets the clock on the 10-year. And so we then have it open as something that we have to review. We have to respond to any queries that any external agencies might have. So there's a little bit of a caveat to the 6-year limitation that is provided by the federal agencies currently.
So it's 6 years from the time it was last cited?
Yeah,
from the last time it was cited or used.
and I want to clarify too. But if it's cited by the respondent, or basically the investigator that submitted the publication, then that's what we, we consider that the clock start kicking again.
Okay, thanks. Josh?
Yes, hi Deepika and Maria, thanks for this presentation. It sometimes happens that an Emory researcher may receive a private communication from a colleague questioning the integrity of science in a publication, or may learn via PubPeer that some are publicly questioning the integrity of his or her science. What advice do you have for researchers, who learn that somebody is suggesting that maybe they are engaging in scientific misconduct?
So I think our first advice would be that if it's in the School of Medicine, they reach out to you and subsequently to us. But I think it's always good to reach out to the RIO team so we can look into it further. If there is a publication agency that or a publisher that reaches out with any questions, any corrective actions, any retractions that they are requesting, or any corrections to the research record itself, we want to make sure that those are addressed in a timely manner, and also so that it doesn't get escalated and the publisher doesn't feel that, oh, there's something over here that isn't being addressed, and then we ultimately will receive it as a research misconduct allegation, or worse, NIH then receives it directly because the complainant in this case feels that either the institution or the investigator hasn't taken the necessary steps in a timely manner. So I think the first advice would be that they reach out to you and to us so we can look into it further and advise them accordingly.
Other questions from the group?
So if there aren't any other questions, and I know we have the gift of time with us today. So what we would like to do is the research misconduct training. So responsible conduct of research training, we have a module that's been set up, and it's pretty comprehensive. And the way it's set up is it's in accordance with NIH requirements, many of the NSF requirements as well. And it has components from the new NIH curriculum. But I think most importantly of note is that it's designed and customized for Emory's use. So you're not just getting regulatory guidance, which is generic, it's how it's being applied at Emory. And so it gives you a sneak peek into the various research administrative offices, the various regulatory requirements with those offices. So I think that's essential. So I'll turn it over to Maria, whose team was very hard at work to make sure that we made the effective date timeline for the new NIH policy on September 25th. And the course currently, as you all can see, Maria is logging into ELMS. So it currently is in ELMS.
Thank you, Deepika. So I want to show you, of course, I have logged in so your view might be different, but it's really easy to find if you go to the ELMS login page, as I did. I don't know if you saw that. And then you search under Finding Learning with RCR, or RCR Online training is going to pop up. So you're going to see it. So we have first an acknowledgement and our objectives here. But as you can see here in the menu on your right, I guess, for me, you're going to see some of the topics that we cover about the importance of the training, what if research, what might be very basic, but what we go through here is every topic that is required from the regulatory bodies or what we need to cover. But we have done it in a way that is not redundant. For example, let's take financial conflict of interest. What we're trying to do here, knowing that everybody has to take that training anyway, if you have a financial conflict of interest, you have to do it anyhow. So you have here information from everybody that is basically the information that you should know to know what's next step you need to take. For example, if you are new to Emory or you're new to research or new to this type of issue at all, with this information, you will find what is the next thing I need to do if I find myself with a significant financial conflict of interest, for example, right? And we have done the same thing with this research information that we have here, just trying to provide very easy, digestible information for you. The same thing for human subject protection. So if you are doing clinical research, you know that you have to take CD training that is very substantive and very educative, I guess, for human subject research. So we don't want to necessarily do the same here because it's really redundant and you will have to take it anyway. What we're doing here is to provide to you what is the basics that you should know and know when you need to basically submit to the IRB, and also those important links of how to know if my research is under the IRB oversight, and also what do I need to know if I found myself there. We also provide information about embryonic stem cell research, for example, and we have that separate, but that's something that doesn't happen very often here in Emory, and we have here resources. So you see, in general, we have those topics covered, the same thing with IACUC information, but then we go more in depth with other topics. For example, with mentor-mentee relationships, we have taken it a little more because this besides CD, there's no other places where you will receive this information. So we're trying to provide this in a way that you, again, is digestible and easy to have, but also it's not overwhelming, because we have heard really clear from a lot of people about CD training that it tends to be so much that it's hard to really absorb anything when it's so much information. So the purpose of this training, again, is to give you those tools and that information so you can make sure to give it to people that you work with, people that you supervise, etc., so to make sure that they take it. Another important thing at the end of this training, we do have here attestation document, so you can not only provide your input, but also get that attestation signed, and you can get your certificate of completion. So you can have it for your submissions to NSF or NIH. One thing that we want to make clear, NIH have high standards for training, and they do accept this type of training as part of the training, but also they require in-person training. So in our website, we do have more information about what is required here. And we have it here in our website, so you can go and here's a link. Let me see if I'm going to copy it and put it in the chat a little later. But here basically is what are your training requirements per if you are sponsored by the by NIFA or NSF. So we have all this information here, and also we have here the information about the frequency and timing for NIH if you are, you have that type of award. Another thing that we provide here at the end of the training is a list of all the resources, because you will notice that in every of these topics that we cover here, we have links. So we knew that it was going to be important to have a list of resources. So we put it here in this document that is also available in our website of all those links and information and where to find them. So it is easy in the, very easy accessible to you, and you can also share it with people that you do, or also you can use it as part of the training that you provide to your staff. So with that, we hope that you find this training good. We work really hard on it. We're also always look for your input and your, anything that you want added to it, changed, etc. So we're trying to cover things as much as we can, but to try to make this a training that lasts forever, right? You are all very busy, and we understand that there's a lot of training happening at Emory. So we want to make sure that the training is, very good, but also not overwhelming, especially for new trainees. Any questions about that?
Thank you for sharing that. Do you think there's ever going to be an Emory requirement to complete that training?
So there's a requirement by NIH, NSF, and NIFA, but I'll let Deepika answer that.
So, so we're trying to make training where it's required by federal agencies to be also required for our researchers. And there has been a recent CHIPS and Science Act, which is trying to collate everything that NIH needs and wants. NSF has some few additional requirements. And so all in all, the CHIPS and Science Act kind of brings it all together that anybody who's on a federal, who's on federal funding, they need to have the RCR training done. And so we are, there's one of our policies, 7.9, that is also getting updated to kind of define these requirements for our researchers. And because it's only a matter of time that other private funding agencies will want to piggyback on these requirements and make federal funding or make RCR training a requirement regardless. So we're headed in that direction, but we're not making that not taking the stance right away because we know training is burdensome, and we have a decentralized infrastructure with some of our schools more focused on the medical research side, as opposed to some of our professional schools that may not be needing or having to take the RCR component.
Thanks. Any other questions? Maria and Deepika, is there anything else you wanted to share today?
Not so much on the research misconduct side.
Right, this is very helpful, and we will be posting the recording of this, as I mentioned, in the video library on the faculty development website for the School of Medicine. So if you need to go back and refresh your memory, you'll be able to see that. We also will ask for an evaluation of the session. We always strive to be ever better and make sure we're meeting your needs. So Chanel just put a link to an evaluation for this session in the chat. She'll also send it out via email to everyone who attended. So I want to really thank our speakers for making things very clear about research misconduct and some of the common pitfalls and where to reach out if you need help. And thank the audience for sticking with us. So thanks very much. We'll end for today.